What's up, everyone? Matt Gajewski here, back again talking college basketball. It is March the 8th. We have our last mega Saturday. Couple nuances to this slate. It is rivalry week for a lot of teams. Conference tournaments are going on for a lot of the low and mid majors, but it is not always my favorite week at the high major level. There are a lot of motivation concerns throughout the week. My process is pretty mathematical, and those are hard things to account for. I'm not saying they don't exist. I very much think they do. I do believe that people's ability to properly evaluate them and put them into a spread format, a total format, is a different story. But we have a lot to get into. Let's start with what should have been the marquee game of the day. Alabama takes on Auburn. It is the rematch. This spread is currently 7.5 points in favor of the home Auburn team. Totals 178.5. Injuries in the game. Latrell Wrightsell's been out for the year as an ACL. Darion Reed's been out for a while for Bama as well. For Auburn, Denver Jones missed their last game. Janai Broome keeps exiting games and returning. He is clearly not 100%, but I don't think he misses the game. As he tries to chase down Cooper Flagg for Player of the Year, he's now a pretty big underdog, which makes sense. But the motivation concerns start on the Auburn side. We just saw them clinch the SEC regular season last weekend. Then they played earlier this week against Texas A&M and dropped the game, and it wasn't all that impressive aesthetically. People might say Auburn needs this win for the number one overall seed. I don't particularly agree. I think they have that locked up. I'm not sure what it would take for Auburn to drop below the number one overall seed. I think they would have to lose this game. I think they would have to lose immediately in the SEC tournament. And I think Duke would have to probably win the ACC, which isn't that crazy. Anyway, part of the reason why this is a rematch from February 15th, where Auburn won 94-85 on the road. They shot 40% from three, held Alabama to 19% from three. They were out-rebounded 49-40, including on the offensive glass, but that was sort of neutralized with some of the free throws that Auburn shot. And overall, the game was won by Auburn playing elite defense. More on that in a second. As far as resumes go, the reason I don't think Auburn can drop below the number one overall seed, which is crazy, is because of this body of work. 9-3 against the top 25. Wins over Tennessee, Houston, Alabama. Those are all candidates for number one seeds, and two of them are probably going to be one seeds. All three of their losses are in the top 25. They did lose to Texas A&M, which is a concern, but there was some motivation in that game after they had just clinched the SEC. Alabama's coming off two straight losses. Those came against top five teams in the country, Tennessee and Florida. So it kind of is what it is when you're playing that level of competition. And they came by single digits against those teams. So I'm not really fading Alabama at this point, postseason-wise. They played some really hard opponents and got the bad end of single-digit games. It is what it is. They're 5-6 against the top 25. They have wins over Houston, beat Kentucky twice. They have one loss outside the top 25 that came to Oregon and Vegas. But when they've played other teams that are candidates for one seeds, they have not gotten over the hump. There's just no way around that. Just the win over just a win over Houston. They have the loss to Tennessee. As far as stylistics in this game, both teams are tall. Bama's 5th in effective height, 15th in rebounding. Auburn 77th in effective height, 35th in rebounding. It's a strength for Bama on paper. It did play out in Bama's direction in game one on the glass. But from there, the Auburn defense is what won them that game, in my opinion. 12th in total defense. That definitely frustrated Alabama. Alabama's 3rd in two-point percentage. Auburn's 22nd in two-point defense. But Auburn's rim protection was elite in that game. They blocked 6 shots. Every time Mark Sears was getting to the rim, it was extremely contested or just getting flat out blocked. And Alabama's playing pretty significantly smaller guards in this matchup. Basically just Tahad Pettiford's undersized for Auburn. Everyone else is large and tall. But Alabama also has some interior problems when you match up against Auburn. You basically have two specialists that are playing a lot of minutes. Maybe Reed coming back would help, but I don't think he'd even play full minutes. Cliff Amore is an elite rim protector. He's awesome on defense, but he's basically a zero on offense. Mo Diabate is the exact opposite. He actually gives you something dynamic on offense, but he can't defend. So every time you're putting a big on the floor for your Bama, guarding Janai Broome, Chaney Johnson, Cardwell, you're dealing with some sort of limitation, whether it's offensively or defensively. Alabama can certainly shoot the ball, and it's gotten better throughout the year. Really, the latest blip on the radar, and the only one of late, was that Auburn game, which is a problem because, Auburn's length, even at guard, is going to be an issue against anyone. But overall, Alabama's 15th in effective field goal percentage, 104th in three-point percentage. That's positively regressed to 36th since January 1st. The big elephant in the room is the 19% in their first game. I see a lot of places like Shot Quality argue that this should have been an analytical win for Alabama by a pretty wide margin. I wouldn't go that far. I do think Alabama ran pretty cold to hit 19% of their threes. But I think that is also selling Auburn short, contesting threes and creating opportunities that are difficult for Alabama to make, whereas another team might give you wide open looks or at least easier paths to hit shots. Anyway, on top of their defensive advantage, Auburn's also very good on offense. I don't even want to discount that. 21st in effective field goal, 32nd from three. Tahad Pettiford, Miles Kelly, Chad Baker-Mazara, Denver Jones are all over 39%. So even if Denver Jones misses this game, you have three separate three-point shooters that are hitting elite numbers. Turnover margin vastly favors Auburn. That wasn't the big factor in game one, but if it plays out like that, they're significantly ahead of Bama, who has problems turning the ball over. Fouls do favor Alabama, and really that's just going to come down to free throws because it doesn't really matter for personnel with Auburn. They're so deep. They can afford players picking up fouls. Ask Dylan Cardwell. He does it every game. But this does come down to the motivation question for me. In health, I suppose. I don't know about Denver Jones, but I think Janai is going to play. We make this a little wider than the current number. When this opened, you could get Alabama close to a double-digit dog. Now it's down to 7.5. At that opening number, had no issues playing the Tide. Actually, would have loved to play it. In fact, I just missed it. So it's shame on me for not being on my computer the second line drop. That's on me, and I apologize. But at the current number, I still tend to lean Alabama. They're not the team with motivation questions. They're not the team with health concerns. And they are the team that ran poorly in the first matchup. They do have a path to victory. It is just hitting more three-pointers than they did in the first game because they already had the rebounding advantage. So we're going to see where this goes. I'd love it to climb back to 8.5. I'd love a 9. I don't think it's going to get there. At 7.5, it's going to be a pass. But we'll see where the number goes through the night. Perhaps we can find a better number. Next up, probably not the second best game on the slate, but I wanted to talk about it right after the Auburn game because of Duke's relation to Auburn via the number 1 seeds. But it's Duke taking on North Carolina. It's a 10.5-point spread in favor of the road team. The total in the game is 157. It's come down a little bit. Injuries for Duke, we have Malik Brown. I don't think we see him till the postseason. And Caleb Foster popped up as well. He's not a main contributor at this point. North Carolina is healthy. Another rematch from February 1st. Duke won 87-70 on their home floor. North Carolina actually put up decent shooting numbers in that game, better than they have in a lot of contests, but Duke shot 50% from three and forced 14 turnovers. They also shot 11 more free throws. When you do that, you're going to win games. And Duke has an awesome resume, but I mean, the reason I think they can't take the number 1 overall seed unless Auburn drops the next 2 games and Duke wins everything in the ACC. Auburn's 9-3 against the top 25. Duke is 4-3. So yeah, it's a good resume for Duke. There's no shame in what they've accomplished, but it's just in the SEC, Auburn's had so many more opportunities and they've taken care of business in so many more games of this caliber. Duke's best wins are against Arizona, this very Auburn team, which is notable head-to-head, and Louisville as well in the Madison Square Garden game. They've lost 3 times to Kentucky, Kansas, and Clemson. Those are all top 25 opponents. 2 of those did occur in November, and the reason I bring that up, Duke has a lot of the roster is freshmen, so the best time to play them, hypothetically, is in November. And then their most recent loss against Clemson, Cooper Flagg played through an illness and an honorable effort. They almost won if it weren't for him, slipping on the baseline at the end of the game. Resume-wise, North Carolina is 0-8 against the top 25. Their best win is over 27, UCLA on a neutral court. They have 3 losses outside the top 50, Stanford, Wake Forest, and Pitt. They played an OT game against Boston College, too, so it hasn't always been pretty in their wins. A lot of people are going to hype this game up because North Carolina is on a 6-game win streak and I guess not completely dead for the tournament. They need to win here. But in that 6-game win streak, they have no wins higher than 91 Florida State. They've played basically a slew of sub 100 teams. That's just what the ACC is right now. As far as stylistics, I even hesitate to bring this up because Duke has literally every single stylistic advantage. As far as effective height, Duke to 208, rebounding 5th to 79th. Maybe that is discounting North Carolina a little bit. They've changed their rotation. We are seeing more Van Allen Lubin and Jalen Withers minutes. Those guys are 6'8" and 6'9", but the problem is they're still ceding height to Malawach and Flagg, and then the guards are definitely ceding height. The shortest Duke guard is 6'6". The only North Carolina guard that plays is Drake Powell at that height. Everyone else is significantly shorter. RJ Davis is like 6'1". You're ceding height across the board, man. Like, this is just a horrific stylistic matchup. And plus, on the Lubin and Withers thing, these players are bad. They're 35th and 49th in terms of overall efficiency in the ACC. Remember, this is a terrible conference, and these are players outside the top 30 and 40 getting more minutes for North Carolina against lottery picks. I mean, just good luck. From there, North Carolina, they've actually jumped from 89th to 33rd in three-point percentage since January 1st. I need to at least point that out. They have shot the ball better, and it's not because of RJ Davis. He's still at 32%, having an awful season shooting. It's Ian Jackson and Drake Powell. They've actually been really good contributors from three for this team. But the problem is Duke has all that size. They're contesting shots against taller teams in North Carolina, and Duke's deep. You can deal with foul trouble for Konkanippel or Flagg. They can overcome that. And when you look at the other side, Duke has 5 players at the guard position shooting at least 38% from three. North Carolina's 198th in three-point defense. Duke is nearly top 10 in every defensive metric. So I'm happy that North Carolina has experienced some positive regression. Now you're shooting into one of the best defenses in the country. Conversely, Duke didn't need any regression, and they're shooting into one of the worst defenses in the country. From there, Duke is over 200 spots ahead in turnovers forced. I mean, we mathematically make this game outside the spread. I think the one thing you could say for North Carolina outside of their shooting regression, which I don't think they're going to experience in this game, is they're playing at home. This rivalry means a lot. Apparently, Hubert Davis is not coaching for his job anymore because they re-signed him. But, man, if Duke wants to win this game by 30 points, they're going to. They were up by 30 in their last game when these two teams played very deep into the game and just took their foot off the gas and ended up only winning by 17. I played the 10.5 with Duke. I thought there was a decent chance this might move, and I still think there is. 10.5 is still out there right now. So this is one we are going to play with some confidence, which it doesn't feel good when you play Duke on the road in this rivalry. You hate to see it, kind of. But at the end of the day, like, what are we going to do? Are we really going to back North Carolina in this spot? If you do want to wait, the one thing I could see is these narrative bros saying exactly what I just said in North Carolina playing at home. But we'll move on. Duke is the spot for us. SEC play continues. Kentucky takes on Missouri. This game has a 5.5-point spread in favor of the home Missouri team. They've taken some money already. 167.5 total. Only injuries in this spot are on the Kentucky side. Jackson Robinson's been out for a bit. He came back, got hurt again. Kirk Reese is out for the year. Kentucky has a shockingly good resume for being as hurt as they've been at times. They've also been without Lamont Butler for periods of time. Andrew Carr was hurt. Missouri's had a very clean bill of health, but Kentucky sits at 7-5 in the top 25 with wins over Duke at 1, Gonzaga at 8, Florida at 4, and Tennessee twice at 5. For being as hurt as they've been, I mean, this is pretty crazy. The thing with them is they do have peaks and valleys. 5 losses outside the top 25, Ohio State at 34, Georgia at 33, Vanderbilt 43, Arkansas 39, Texas 44. You can't hang your hat on. None of those are egregious losses. The lowest one is Texas at 44. But they do pile up more losses than some of the other elite teams in the SEC. Missouri, problematically, has now lost 3 of their last 4 games, and their lone win in that span came against South Carolina, who's in last place in the SEC. They do have 3 losses in that span to pretty bad teams. I would say the Arkansas and Vanderbilt losses aren't great because they're towards the bottom of the conference. But when you look at their body of work against the top 25, it's still good. 4-4, beat Kansas at 22, beat Florida at 4, beat Bama at 6. Those are high-quality wins. You're just now starting to pile up some of the losses that you don't want to take. On top of Arkansas, Vandy, and Oklahoma, they did drop a game in non-con to Memphis as well, who's at 49. So not the greatest body of work is what it is. It's high, it's low. That's not very different from Kentucky. Stylistically, Kentucky is 41st in effective height, 62nd in rebounding. Missouri is 30th in effective height and 127th in rebounding. That's a fairly neutral matchup on paper. I do have more faith in Kentucky using their height than Missouri at this point. I just really am not quite sure what to make of Missouri. In their last 4 games where they've gone 1-3, they've been annihilated on defense. Their defense has not shown up in really any of those games. And I think it's a pretty big concern moving forward. Let's just see where Missouri outranks Kentucky. On the interior, it's 165 to 279. Both these teams have horrific rim protection on the year, but Missouri's last 4 games, that gap narrows, not because Kentucky got better, but because Missouri got worse. And more concerning than anything else for Missouri is they got crushed on the glass by the 2 smallest teams in the conference. 2 of the 3 smallest, Oklahoma and Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt annihilated this team on the glass. Vanderbilt's outside the top 300 in height. And Missouri comes in 30th? Like, this is an effort thing, man. Like, what happened in that game? I don't have the answer, but it's concerning because it's not just a blip on the radar. It's happened more than once. Kentucky does play with size. And again, this team is 62nd in rebounding. You can't sleep on Kentucky on the inside. If you do, you're going to get crushed on the glass again. Offensively, both of these teams are elite. Kentucky's 18th in effective field goal percentage. Missouri's 10th. Both these teams are 28th in three-point percentage. They're actually tied. And they're both top 30 in two-point percentage. Just elite offense across the board. I do think Kentucky needs to be dinged a little bit because you lost Jackson Robinson. I mean, he's your second best shooter percentage-wise. And I think he does a little more for your offense. Kobe Brea is at 43.5% from 3. But he doesn't really create a lot on his own. And now you're just looking at the other side of this. Missouri is going to space you with Caleb Grill and Tamar Bates, both over 41% on over 100 attempts. Pretty tricky. I will say that's a tougher matchup. The best way to beat Kentucky on paper is at the rim. So this is a pretty, I think, advantageous matchup if Missouri can find a way to use that. I just not 100% sure they can. As far as rim defense, Kentucky, I don't know. I have no explanation for why they're so bad at the rim and why Missouri hasn't been able to exploit this either. It's kind of just like a question on both sides. Why are you so bad inside? Anyway, turnover margin favors Missouri. Both teams are good at taking care of the ball. It's just Missouri is 32nd in turnovers forced, and Kentucky doesn't force any. They're 339th. But with Lamont Butler back, I don't really think Missouri is going to force as many turnovers as maybe this number indicates. This is another one where we make pretty close to the spread, which would have lent itself to playing a Missouri right away in the game, but it is moved in favor of them at home. Right now, we currently show actually a little bit of value on the Kentucky side. This is not one I plan to play. There's too many questions on the interior for both of these teams. The injuries in Kentucky haven't helped, and Missouri's recent play has been extremely concerning. What they've done on the glass is horrifying, frankly. As you know by now, we're talking about gambling on the show. If you or somebody you know has a gambling problem, please call or text 1-800-GAMBLER. You must be 21 or older to play in most areas. All right. We get to one of the narrative games. Arizona takes on Kansas. It's a 3.5-point spread at 153 total. Injuries in the game, just Shaquille Moore. He's a rotational player for Kansas. Arizona's healthy at this point. It's senior night for Kansas. A lot of people are probably going to take that and put it into their analysis. They do play at home, and traditionally Fog Allen does have a nice home court advantage. We do factor home court advantage mathematically into the projections you see on the screen. So anything more than that would be counting it twice. The senior day stuff, that's really tough to quantify, and I generally do not traffic in that. But you should know, this Kansas team that went to the finals, Dickinson, DeJuan Harris, like a lot of these guys are old and not going to be there anymore, so it could be an important game. Arizona is 3-6 against the top 25. They have wins over Iowa State without Momcilovic, BYU and Texas Tech, the best being Tech at number 7, 3 losses outside the top 40. They dropped games to Oklahoma, West Virginia, and Kansas State. Kansas is also 3-6 against the top 25. They have wins over Michigan State, Duke, and Iowa State without Momcilovic. They have 3 losses outside the top 40. West Virginia, Kansas State, and Utah. But the biggest concern I have here is recent play for Kansas. This team doesn't have a win higher than number 94 Colorado in a month. You basically have to go back to January. Crazy stuff this team has put on the floor. They have played some of the better teams in the conference of late, but this is still a very concerning body of work. Not much stands out on the glass in this game. Arizona's 85th in effective height, 10th in rebounding. Kansas pretty strong themselves, 13th in effective height, 57th in rebounding. There might be some room for growth within the metrics for Arizona because they have recently changed their rotation. Not drastically, but they've taken all those inefficient Trey Townsend minutes, given them right to Henry Visar and Carter Bryant. Visar's over 7 feet tall. He's an elite defender. Bryant is the second best defender on this team. So it has boosted their rebounding a little bit, but where it's really helped is rim protection. And this team, they needed a boost on defense without a doubt. As far as shooting the ball, neither team can shoot. I almost hesitate to say that for Arizona. 97th in effective field goal, 290th in 3, versus Kansas, who's 79th in effective field goal, but 164th in 3. These teams have moved in different directions since conference play started. Kansas has gone from 164 to 202 in three-point percentage. Arizona has jumped from 290th to 256th. So outside the top 200 for both these teams, neither team can shoot. However, with Arizona, it's just, why is Caleb Love taking so many shots? He's hitting 31.5% of his threes. They actually have some decent shooters percentage-wise, Carter Bryant and Anthony Delorso. Maybe that would change over a larger sample, but I just can't really justify Caleb Love taking over 130 more threes than those players at a 31.5% clip. He has over 200 three-point attempts this year. It's just wild inefficiency, and it really brings down your effective shooting numbers. With Kansas, I don't think it's anything stylistic like Arizona. Arizona has other options theoretically. Kansas really doesn't. You are just so limited offensively. Zeke Mayo is the only legitimate threat from 3. He's hitting 39% of his three-pointers. DeJuan Harris can't shoot, pure facilitator. Dickinson is not a threat to shoot threes. He's single-digit three-point attempts. He doesn't space the floor. And I don't even know if KJ Adams knows he's on offense all the time. And then they just flat out don't have a fifth starter. So, there's so many offensive limitations with this team, even though they have the better shooting numbers. As far as interior scoring, this edge goes to Arizona. Both teams are very good on defense. Slight edge Kansas's direction, but again, I think the movement to Visar and Bryant might boost Arizona to at least a similar number. With both of these teams strong defensively, the biggest metric that lags is Arizona being 122nd in three-point defense. That's the worst metric inside and out between either team. And then in the periphery, the worst metric for Kansas on defense is their inability to force turnovers. Expect turnover margin to come in this game in favor of Arizona. That's largely because Kansas isn't forcing any, and they don't turn the ball over themselves. Kansas is middle of the pack in both turnovers forced, and Arizona turnovers forced middling in the pack as well. So this does favor the Wildcats. Fouls, Kansas doesn't generate any fouls. Arizona's a little better there. So I think peripherally it does favor Arizona a little bit as well. It's just a tough matchup for me to back Kansas when basically you're hinging the entire analysis on senior night. The model doesn't know it's senior night. It makes it 2.5. And there's not any major injuries where we're discounting Arizona. The model knows this game's at Fog Allen. It doesn't know it's senior night. So how much do you really think that's worth? A team like obviously they need the extra motivation because they can't win games anyway. So I'm not sure. It's not like the other thing is, like Arizona also knows it's senior night. Arizona doesn't want to lose games and see their seed drop. So that team's motivated too. Why aren't we considering that motivation? Anyway, enough of the motivation talk. It's an Arizona play for me at the 3.5, and we will move on. St. John's takes on Marquette. 2.5 point spread in favor of the home Marquette team. 143 total. This is a motivation spot where I'm kind of buying into it, and it's largely because St. John's has clinched the Big East. St. John's is already ruling players out who've been playing through injuries. Davon Smith's not playing in this game. I don't know if Aaron Scott's going to play in this game. I'm a little even concerned that Kadari doesn't play. He's been very banged up of late. With all that said, Pitino does not shoot straight with injuries. We've already seen a game this year where Davon Smith was ruled out verbally by Pitino and he played. So just because Pitino says something doesn't mean it's true. But the other thing, on top of winning the conference, on top of allegedly ruling players out, this team's doing like late night television and just dicking around this week. So I actually kind of buy the motivation stuff in this game, and I don't think St. John's is particularly motivated. But if they are, this is a dangerous matchup for Marquette. It's a rematch from February 4th that St. John's won on their home floor, 70-64, and they won shooting 19% from three. How did they do it? They out-rebounded Marquette 50-28. 50-28. They had 21 offensive boards in that game. Marquette fouled 24 times. That led to 31 free throws, which St. John's only made about 50% of, and still won by 6. I mean, like, my goodness. Imagine if this St. John's team ever hit a shot. They would just start absolutely bodying opponents. This conference is bad. There's no way around it. St. John's is 1-1 in the top 30. They have not played a top 25 team this year. Marquette is at 26, so that's noteworthy. They did beat Marquette already, and then they had a double overtime loss to number 30 Baylor, but they have not faced a team that ranks in the current top 25 in overall efficiency metrics. Their other losses came to solid teams for the most part. 33 Georgia, no shame there. Creighton at 35, no shame. Villanova, kind of some shame. That was another horrible shooting game. But Marquette's not a whole lot better. They do have better non-con. They're 3-2 in the top 30. Wins over Maryland, Purdue, and Wisconsin. Those are all top 13 teams. They also beat Georgia in the non-con at 33. However, they haven't picked up one of those wins since December 7th. Now they have 6 losses outside the top 30, including a really bad one to Dayton at 79. That loss continues to age like spoiled milk. Stylistically, Marquette is 78th in effective height. They don't know how to use it. They're 223rd in rebounding. St. John's is the opposite. They're 136th in effective height and 27th in rebounding. And the one thing you know you're going to get with the Pitino team, at least one that hasn't already won the Big East and done a bunch of late night television, is effort. You're going to get effort every single game from them most of the time. They're 9th in offensive rebounding. That's an advantage they absolutely hammered in game 1. And we talk about the St. John's shooting, and it needs to be mentioned. 250th in effective field goal, 335th from 3. That's going to be even worse without their best shooter, Davon Smith, if he is indeed ruled out. But St. John's knows this. Pitino knows this. He's an excellent coach. They're not taking a lot of threes. They're 342nd in three-point rate, and they're 164th at interior scoring, which isn't great, but it's probably enough to beat Marquette, who has no interior presence. They're 185th in interior defense. They do not rebound the ball. Ben Gold had single-digit rebounds in this game in the first matchup. And Marquette can't shoot either. They're 118th in effective field goal percentage, 251st in three-point percentage. And unlike St. John's, who knows they're bad at shooting threes, Marquette is still shooting the 40th most threes in the country. David Joplin and Cam Jones both hit 30% of their threes this year. 30%. That's horrible. Horrible. St. John's is 109th in perimeter defense. That's their biggest weakness, but it's still a pretty strong strength in this matchup considering how bad Marquette has been shooting the ball. And they do have better percentages from players that aren't taking as many attempts like Stevie Mitchell and Chase Ross, and Gold's percentage is actually pretty good too. If he didn't just stand in the corner and maybe got a rebound once in a while, it would be acceptable. But my goodness, man, if St. John's comes into this game with like any level of effort, I would be terrified if I was Marquette. Both these teams are top 15 in turnovers. Marquette is a little cleaner handling the ball. They outrank St. John's 4-72 in turnovers committed, but both these teams forcing a ton of turnovers. Right now, we make this about -1.5, -2 in favor of Marquette. I wanted to play the Marquette side of things on the angle of St. John's doing late night television. It's hilarious to say that, but 2.5 is too rich for my blood. I would be considering St. John's. Not going to play that either, as I'm worried about the players that might not play in this game, already ruling Smith out, and who knows about Scott and Kadari. What I will play is under 143. Mathematically, we make this closer to 141. This is a number that has already been played for me. 143 is just fine. I would play it down to 141, 141 and a half, somewhere in that range. The matchup itself is not particularly slow, but the offensive efficiency is in severe question for both of these teams. Defenses are both basically top 25 in the nation, and turnovers could be at a high. So we'll play an under. It's a bit of a greasy one considering how fast this is going. But who knows? You might even get a slower pace game from St. John's if they're not trying. Houston takes on Baylor. This game is a 4.5-point spread in favor of Houston. The total is 131. The only injury in the game is Josh Ojimuna for Baylor, their center. He was out of their first matchup, so it's not a big deal for me. And if people call Houston's motivation into question, this team is still very much fighting for a 1 seed. Any sort of loss might ding them below Tennessee and Florida. They're currently behind Duke and Auburn. That's a no-brainer, but you kind of have this 3-way battle between Houston, Florida, and Tennessee for the last one, and maybe Bama if they were to make a run. I wouldn't count them out at least. Houston has locked up the Big 12, but again, they can't afford losses for seeding purposes. This is a rematch from February 10th. They did win 76-65 on their home floor, and both these teams actually had very good shooting numbers in this game. It was just that Houston forced 15 turnovers and ended up with a double-digit win basically on the back of that. Houston is 6-3 against the top 25. And at first I was poking some holes in some of their wins. They did beat Kansas twice, Arizona and Iowa State, BYU and Texas Tech. The first the first Kansas game, they probably should have lost. It was a double OT thriller where they had like a 5% chance to win deep into the game. Free throws and some weird turnovers gave them the victory. Kansas handed it to them. When they beat Texas Tech and Iowa State, both of those teams were down multiple starters. So a little bit of an asterisk there. But then at the end of the day, you beat Arizona, you beat Kansas the second time, you crush BYU. Their body of work is starting to stand taller, even though some of those games were pretty tricky. They have 3 losses in the top 10, and then they have 1 loss that's a little questionable to San Diego State. That was in that Vegas tournament, the Players Era, and some weird things happened in that tournament. Oregon won it. San Diego State beats Houston. I mean, that ended up with some weird outcomes out there. I don't know if you can say what happens if Vegas stays in Vegas for that situation, because that's the only loss that Houston took that was bad. Baylor's 2-8 against the top 25. They're kind of hanging on to their NCAA hopes and dreams by a thread. Their 2 wins in the top 25 came over Kansas and St. John's in OT. They have 3 losses outside the top 50 to TCU, Colorado, and Cincinnati. And unfortunately, a lot of those came of late, so that's a problem. And they've been very, very hurt this year, so that needs to be noted. They're playing a 6'6 center in North Chatham-Mere. Houston plays with comparable size to Baylor, though. They're not super tall. Houston's 252, Baylor's 259. Both teams are pretty strong on the glass, too. Houston's 28th. They're 12th in offensive rebounding. Baylor's 95th, most of that being North Chatham-Mere. They're 32nd in offensive boards. Both teams are top 20 defensively for the most part, force a lot of turnovers. So that is something that's in the feather of the cap of Baylor as well as Houston. It's just everywhere else is kind of where this gap starts to widen and why you see Baylor come in well outside the top 20 in defense. And Houston come in at number 1 overall, which is pretty ridiculous. Baylor does trail them inside and out. They're 158th in interior defense, 289th in perimeter defense. So, with Baylor, that's how you have like a top 20 turnover mark. Turnovers force, go to waste. You're 158th inside and 289th from 3. There's so many ways Houston can beat you with this current roster. They're 92nd in effective field goal. That's only held down because they keep throwing the ball inside to Jawan Roberts and Joseph Tugler too often. They're 256th in 2-point percentage, but 3rd in 3-point percentage. However, they're 308th in 3-point rate. I don't have the answer why they're shooting so few threes and taking all these inefficient shots inside, but it's actually keeping games closer than they should be. I guess the feather in the Houston's cap is they're still winning games despite doing this. I don't know why. LJ Cryer, Milos Uzan, Emmanuel Sharp, they're all hitting at least 42% of their threes. Just when you have to put Malik Wilson in the game, he's over 40%. Terrace Arsenault is above 36%. They just have so much depth and so many shooters. It's a crazy roster. And they have depth on the inside, too. So some of these situations that might favor Baylor, Like, foul margin definitely favors Baylor, but unlike previous Houston teams, you can take some risks. Francis is playing far fewer minutes than he did last year on the interior because you have Tugler and Roberts, and those guys are stalwarts on defense. This team isn't number one on defense without them. Scoring on this team is way easier said than done. Baylor's had a lot of problems scoring the ball this year. They're 123rd in effective field goal percentage, 155th in two-point percentage, 104th in three-point percentage, and their numbers have regressed over the year. Since January 1, they're 195th in three-point percentage. A lot of that has come with just VJ Edgecombe cooling after his red-hot January. Only Jaden Nunn is above 36.5%. Baylor has regressed shooting the ball. They're facing the number one defense. This could get ugly pretty fast here. Houston plays aggressively. Turnover margin does favor them as well. We talked about Baylor being very good at turnovers forced, which they are. That's one of their strengths, their only strength on defense. But they're also 133rd in turnovers committed. This is a team that is reckless with the ball at times. So I am concerned with this team just straight up, really across the board. Size, shooting, turnovers. It's everywhere with this team. We played Houston minus the 4.5. This is a number I am completely fine with and one I would play probably through 5, which is where we make this about 5.5. That's a number that's a little more borderline. But we're talking about a lot of these games in Discord. I'll briefly tell you about it. What that offers is game predictions, lines, and totals for all the games on slates. We also have player props for all the major games, and we're starting to get more and more mid-major player prop availability, and we're going to project all those as well as any others that they offer. All that is available in the Discord. It's rebounds, assists, steals, blocks, points, minutes, fouls, everything you could possibly imagine. There'll be a March Madness tool as well. There's no long-term commitments, so if you would like to, come check it out, even if it's just for March. Cool tools that hopefully you will like if you're a college basketball fan. Whoops, skipped a game. My bad, guys. All right, we're back to it. Big Ten bubble game. Ohio State takes on Indiana, 2-point spread in favor of Indiana, who is at home, 149 total. I can't guarantee that whoever wins this game is in, but I can almost guarantee that whoever loses this game is out. The only injury, Michi Johnson, he's away from the team. This is a rematch from January 17th, a weird one because both teams had a stud out. Indiana played without Malik Renault. Ohio State played without Devin Royal. The game ended with an Indiana victory in overtime, 77-76. Both teams shot the ball well, but Indiana shot 23 free throws to Ohio State's 15. Indiana also out-rebounded Ohio State slightly, but they did have 14 offensive boards. Resumes are very close. That's what happens when you have two teams from the same conference on the bubble. Ohio State is 3-6 against the top 25, beat Kentucky, Purdue, and Maryland. 3 losses outside the top 40 to Pitt, Indiana, and Northwestern. Indiana is 2-6 against the top 25. They've beaten Michigan State and Purdue. They have 3 losses outside the top 40, just like Ohio State, to Iowa, Northwestern, and Nebraska. It's a very weird clash of styles. Indiana is 22nd in effective height, 84th in rebounding. So this is a tall team, good on the glass. Ohio State is 225th in effective height, 188th in rebounding. In the first game, without Renault, Ballo played a little more. He had 15 boards, and 7 of them came on offense. Indiana needs to rely on their interior scoring, which is not great, but it's certainly better than what they're offering from 3, where they sit at 239. Overall, they're at 126 in effective field goal percentage. Sorry, another motorcycle goes by. It's apparently a popular thing in Milwaukee. I guess Harley is here, but it is also March 7th, and it snowed today. Anyway, enough about snow motorcycles in Milwaukee. Where was I? 3-point percentage for Indiana, yeah, it's not good. 239. They should play through Malik Renault and Omar Ballo. That exploits Ohio State's 150th ranked interior defense. And I don't even know if they're that bad at 3-point percentage anymore. They've made some roster changes, minute allocation changes. Luke Goody's playing a ton more. He's a 42% 3-point shooter. A lot of that's coming at the expense of some of these guards. I don't know. He's a 0 on defense, so it comes with some bad too. Ohio State, not really good at scoring inside. They're certainly at a disadvantage here. Somehow Indiana, for having Ballo and Renault, is still only 158th in interior defense. I have a lot of questions with that. But I think the best place to potentially exploit Indiana is from three. They're 100th in three-point defense. And Ohio State is 26th in three-point percentage with two 40% shooters in Bruce Thornton and Mobley. So you should be able to shoot over the top, and I think they will. Neither team forces turnovers at a high clip. Indiana's 147th in turnovers committed. Not really a major advantage. Ohio State's 348th in fouls committed. That does project to be a decent mismatch, especially with the size. Indiana can't generate fouls. But at the end of the day, with Ballo, Renault, and Mbako, if he plays inside more, they're going to be able to score on Royal in this undersized front court. Flat out, Ohio State's just not getting what they thought they would get out of Aaron Bradshaw. It is what it is. But Ohio State has the ability to shoot over the top. These guards have problems for Indiana defending, and like Luke Goody having to play because of his shot making comes with the awful defense. I will say the model makes this about -1. I tend to disagree and side with the home team, Indiana, and their mismatch, I think, is a little easier to exploit. It's higher percentage shots around the rim. It's rebounding. It's block shots. Ohio State has to live and die by the three-pointer. So this is the first time I've disagreed with the model in a bit, at least a couple days. I'm not going to play it because of that. I'm trying to just basically check my intuition when I need to. But yeah, for me, it's an Indiana or a pass. If this got down to like a -1, I'd have a real decision to make in this game. I think Ohio State's out of the tournament. I'm sorry, Buckeye fans. Mississippi State takes on Arkansas. This is a pick'em, and the total is 148. A bubble game for Arkansas. Mississippi State is firmly in the field, but they are falling down the seed line precipitously. I mean, they've been getting crushed. Only injuries basically on the Arkansas side, Boogie Flan and Adu Thero. Their top two players have been out. Mississippi State is now 3-7 against the top 25. Just a crazy schedule for Mississippi State. My goodness. They beat Ole Miss twice and Texas A&M. Those teams are 25-20. They do have 3 losses outside the top 25 to Butler at 74, Oklahoma, and Texas, but most of these losses are coming to quality SEC teams. They're 8-9 in conference, and they only have 3 losses outside the top 25. This is a good body of work for Mississippi State. Really impressed with what they've done considering their roster's a little bit imperfect. Arkansas is 2-8 against the top 25. They beat Kentucky and Missouri, so a little higher end. But they also have the lower end losses, 3 losses outside the top 25 to Baylor, LSU, and South Carolina. Those are the 2 bottom teams in the conference. They're 6-10 in conference, whereas Mississippi State is 8-9. That puts Arkansas firmly on the bubble. Arkansas is another one of these teams that's tall and can't figure out how to use their height. 8th in effective field goal, 8th in effective height, 192nd in rebounding. Mississippi State is 139th in effective height and 74th in rebounding. Mississippi State is 46th on offensive rebounding. Arkansas has now been out-rebounded in 5 of the last 6 games, and the only game where they won that advantage was against the diminutive Vanderbilt team, who is the smallest team in the SEC. Like, you have Zvonimir Ivisic. Like, Thero, when he plays, is 6'8". Brazil is like 6'9". How do you not figure this out? I'm sorry. This is not a Coach Cal rant. Other stylistics, Mississippi State is 134th in effective field goal percentage. They're taking too many threes. 315th in three-point percentage, 107th in three-point rate. Arkansas does play solid defense overall. They're 14th. And they do have, I guess, if I were to point to a weakness, I would say it's inside. 71st in interior defense, whereas they're 52nd from 3. So, yeah, if Mississippi State chooses to, they probably can score inside. The problem is their best offensive weapon is a 5'11" point guard in Josh Hubbard. So it doesn't really lend itself to getting to the rim. Some of your interior players are limited. Like Cam Matthews is awesome on defense, but, man, he doesn't do anything on offense outside of peripherals. And when you look at just offensive players in this conference, or just overall efficient players in this conference, this team is really imbalanced. They have 2 inside the top 70. It's Cam Matthews and Hubbard. I mean, it's not like Arkansas is a lot better. They lost their top 2 players, and the only player inside the top 50 for them is Zvonimir Ivisic. But anyway, let's get to the Arkansas side. They're 104th in effective field goal percentage, 213th from 3. The biggest weakness for Mississippi State is their 326th ranked three-point defense, but I'm not confident Arkansas can exploit it. On the Zvonimir Ivisic thing, he's the best three-point shooter on the team at 39.5%. Their other options, Janelle Davis and DJ Wagner, are below 32. Wagner's never been a good shooter, so that's not a surprise. He's in his second year. He's never eclipsed 32%. And then Nelly Davis hit 40% with FAU last year before he transferred. But man, I'll tell you what, the SEC is a bit different than playing at FAU, and his three-point percentage has dropped 8%. But the thing with Zvonimir hitting nearly 40% is he can't play all the minutes, or at least Coach Cal won't do that. So I'm not really sure what to make of this. Turnover margin, foul margin are pretty equal for both of these teams. I think for me, I'm a little more interested in Arkansas just based on the fact that this team is more talented. Maximizing it has been a huge problem for this team, but you have like 7-footers and Ivisic who can shoot threes. Brazil had an awesome game in their last time out, but where's he been all year? I mean, this guy was previously playing 30 minutes a game under a different regime, under Muss. And then like your guards are wildly underachieving. So it's just very difficult. I will say they're not deep. They have 7 scholarship players now that they've lost Thero, who's rumored to be out for the season. That has not been confirmed. And Fland is confirmed out for the season. So you're not deep. You run into some problems. Perhaps these guys run out of gas from fatigue. But I think they're more talented. If you force me to pick them, I would be on the Arkansas side. We make this number closer to 1.5, which shows some value. But it's going to be a pass for me. I'm a little I bet Arkansas, what was that game? You guys will know in the chat. You can leave it in the comments. What was the game where Arkansas was like 5 for 31 from 3? And I thought it would be a fantastic idea to bet them. It was like last weekend. They got crushed. Just escaping me off the top of my head. But that scarred me a little bit if you haven't figured that out. Oklahoma, Texas, let's remain in the SEC for a bubble game. It is also a huge rivalry for these two former Big 12 teams. Injury-wise, Sam Goodwin's banged up for Oklahoma. Not sure if he goes, and Chendall Weaver's been out for a while. It's a 5.5-point spread in favor of the home Longhorns, a 155.5 total. A rematch from January 15th where Texas won 77-73 on the road. Most of the efficiency metrics in that game came in pretty even, or you had these micro edges for Texas. Oklahoma's 3-9 against the top 25. This is a funny body of work for me because they crushed the non-conference schedule, beating Arizona and Louisville. They also beat Missouri. And then they've lost in the SEC a bunch, but they only have 3 losses outside the top 25 to Georgia at 33, Texas at 44, and LSU at 81. Like, how good is the SEC where your worst teams are crushing Arizona and Louisville, teams that have been ranked as high as 3 seeds? It's just a pretty wild conference, and you have Oklahoma on the bubble because of where they play and nothing more. Texas is 3-6 against the top 25. They have fewer losses in the top 25, but I don't think that's a good thing. They have more losses out of it. They beat Missouri, Texas A&M, and Kentucky, but they now have 7 losses outside the top 30. So that's really what's damning here is they played weaker competition than Oklahoma, and they've done poorly in it. They have losses to South Carolina at 71. Actually, you know what? They do have a lot of losses, and some of them are outside the top 30, but South Carolina being your worst one's not bad. Second worst one being Vandy at 43. There's like this narrow band of teams that Texas keeps losing to. And unfortunately, I just think they've racked up too many to really do themselves any favors the rest of the way unless they win the SEC. Size comes in comparable for both teams. Oklahoma 146th in effective height, 242nd in rebounding. Texas is 110th in height, 143rd in rebounding. Effective field goal percentage, Oklahoma is awesome at shooting the ball, 39th in effective field goal, 46th in 3. That's positively regressive late too. Duke Miles, Dalton Forsythe, Bryson Gooding all hitting over 40% of their threes. Jalen Moore is not far behind. Texas' biggest weakness is defending the perimeter. They're 170th there. So a pretty big advantage for Oklahoma shooting the ball over the top. Texas is 81st in effective field goal, 136th in 2-point percentage, 63rd from 3. Trey Johnson's by far their best perimeter shooter at 40%. Arthur Kaluma and Tremont Mark aren't too far behind at 37 apiece. But neither has shot more than 83 raw attempts this year. So yeah, you're a 37% shooter, but you're not taking any shots. I do think the easiest way to beat Oklahoma is attacking their 328th interior defense. But the problem is you don't have a ton of size for Texas to begin with. Your center is Caden Shedrick. He's awesome on defense. He's a great defender, but he's a complete zero on offense. Now that Texas has moved to the SEC, let's think of Caden Shedrick a little bit like the SEC version of KJ Adams. Anyway, turnover margin's about equal. Both these teams struggle with fouls. I will say Oklahoma's deeper, so maybe that helps them with the foul stuff. But if it gets to free throws, Texas has a much higher percentage. They're 11th in free throw percentage in the country. We make this about 4-point spread, even a little bit lower than that. Texas has taken a lot of money, which is surprising to me for a team that has been very concerning of late with their body of work, and Oklahoma, who's done the exact opposite and worked their way back onto the bubble and perhaps in the field if it started today. 5.5 points is a lot. I'm debating playing this. The reason I haven't played it yet is that Texas has just gotten pounded to start. If this gets to a 6 or 6.5, I'll certainly fire. I'll probably fire the 5.5. We show enough value on it. Sometimes it just pays to hesitate. You can get an extra half point. So we'll continue to wait. This will be in Discord, but this is one of the stronger leans we've had on the stream so far. And before we go any further, the videos have received a lot of good feedback, a lot of likes, subscriptions, comments. If you've done any of that, thank you. It does help a lot. If you're enjoying this video, please consider liking, subscribing, leaving a comment. I can't tell you how much it really actually does help a small channel, so thank you. I really appreciate your time with those little things. Vanderbilt takes on Georgia. This is a game with a 4-point spread in favor of the home Georgia Bulldogs. It's a 149.5 total. Only injury is Grant Huffman on Vanderbilt. He's a question mark right now. Vanderbilt somehow is at 5 and 6 in the top 25, which is amazing to me considering their roster. Beat Missouri, Texas A&M, Ole Miss, Kentucky, Tennessee. 3 of those wins came in the last 2 weeks. Vanderbilt is having an awesome run. Georgia is also kind of riding the ship. They're 3 and 8 against the top 25. They did beat St. John's, Kentucky, and Florida. A great win for them. They needed it. They don't have a loss worse than Arkansas at number 39. They only have 2 losses outside the top 26. This is just an SEC problem. It's too deep with too many good teams. You're going to end up with teams inevitably not making it that are probably deserving, and if they played in the A-10, would be auto bids. Regardless, this is a bubble-ish matchup. I think Vandy and Georgia have both played themselves on the right side at the expense of teams like Texas. But as usual, Vanderbilt is ceding a ton of size to Georgia. They're 317th in height, 161st in rebounding. Georgia plays the 24th tallest lineup in the country. They're 53rd in rebounding. Asa Newell is awesome inside. Vanderbilt does have superior offensive metrics. That's largely because Georgia turns the ball over a lot. Georgia actually is a little better shooting the ball, 103 to 116 in effective field goal. Both teams rank 213th in three-point percentage. They're tied. Georgia just a little better scoring inside. That should surprise no one with Newell and Vanderbilt being as small as they are. Defensively, Georgia has a lot of advantages. 57th in interior defense, 20th on the perimeter. Vanderbilt's 206th in interior defense and 336 on the perimeter. That's another reason why I'm just shocked that Vanderbilt's body of work has gotten to where it is. Their efficiency metrics on defense especially are very concerning. Turnover margin favors Vanderbilt more than anything else defensively. They're 37th in turnovers forced. Georgia's 292nd in turnovers committed. So that's the big Vandy mismatch. They can force a lot of turnovers, create points in transition. This is a big mismatch for them. They're taking money again. This is a similar spot where this was 4 points in favor of Georgia. The 4 is getting hammered hard for Vandy. I'm not going to be surprised if we see a -3.5. I'm going to play the -4 if I have to. I'm going to keep tabs on this. But this is another one where I'm just waiting to see if we can't get a -3.5, and that would be an auto fire for me and one we would take happily. Let's get to our final game in the SEC. It's Ole Miss taking on Florida. No major injuries in this game. It's a 10.5 point spread in favor of the home Gators, 157.5 total. Ole Miss having a very good season under Chris Beard, 5-5 against the top 25, beat BYU, Louisville, Alabama, Tennessee, and Kentucky. 2 losses outside the top 40 are to Vanderbilt and Memphis, both in the top 50. Florida has a very good body of work. They're 4-3 against the top 25 with wins over number 5 Tennessee, number 2 Auburn, number 6 Alabama. It doesn't get a lot better than that. They only have 1 loss outside the top 25. It came last week to Georgia in a crazy game. If Florida hits even like a couple more free throws, they win that game. It's a tough loss to take, but I mean, this is an awesome Florida team with an awesome body of work. Similar to Vanderbilt, Ole Miss is typically seeding height. They're a bottom 3 team in height in this conference. Florida's 35th in height, 12th in rebounding. Ole Miss is 271st in height, 321st in rebounding. This could be even worse. Florida just returned Hand-Lockton. They now have Micah Hand-Lockton, Ruben Chenyolu, Thomas Haw, and Alex Condon all in the front court. I mean, good luck, man. Good luck. Defensively, Florida's 13th, 15th on the interior, 7th on the perimeter. Ole Miss is 38th in total defense, but 173rd on the interior, 109th on the perimeter. Again, they force a lot of turnovers. But both teams are awesome at taking care of the ball. This is not like the previous matchup. Florida's not turning it over. So that advantage is sort of lost in this game. Florida, 53rd in effective field goal. We already mentioned inside, they're a wagon. They're 100th in three-point percentage. Interestingly, Walter Clayton, Elijah Martin, Will Richard, all right on 36%. Not elite, but it's consistent. The opposite is true of what Ole Miss has been showing us. They have regressed down to, let's see here, three-point percentage. They're down to 178th. On the year, they're 128th, and since January 1st, it's dropped to 178th. Mainly because of Dre Davis and Matthew Morrell. They're neither shooting better than 32%. Jalen Murray and Padula are both at 39%, so that's good for Ole Miss, but man, really tough. I'm not sure I can find a single advantage in this game that actually matters. You would say turnovers, but Florida's just not turning it over. We make this basically right on the 10.5 number, almost 11. So just, I guess very slightly like minus 10.7 for Florida. That's the reason I haven't taken it. I really need to consider this overnight. I think there's a chance Florida bodies Ole Miss with this advantage they have inside. I've thought this a couple times. I thought this in the Georgia game. And there's been twice this year where Florida has woken up very sleepy. They lost to Tennessee, who did not have Igor Milicic or Zakai Ziegler, but Florida scored 44 points. And then the Georgia game, which was a track meet, but Georgia is not that good at shooting. There's no reason they should have lost. That'll do it for us. We'll break down more games in Discord throughout the day. Last Mega Saturday, so hopefully you enjoyed it. We'll be back for Sunday, and then we'll get right into conference tournaments. So thank you guys. Have a good night. We'll see you later.